Hey everybody, so welcome back to Jim Bob's Garden. So I'm out here messing with my Harley and you're wondering what the hell does that have to do with growing a garden? Absolutely nothing. So I do have a Harley and I haven't really showed it off. So I thought, what the heck, I'll go ahead and wash it, because that's what I've been doing here lately, is cleaning up cars, doing tune-ups and so on. Speaking of such, I just got a complaint, an old man complaint. And I don't know if you can see it very well, but I'm all beat up, all up on my hands and arms. All of that from doing the last 3 spark plugs on my Buick over here. But anyway, that's not really what I'm here to talk about today. So I figure I'll go ahead and wash my Harley as I talk to you about this stuff. And primarily that's about when to plant your spring garden. Alright, now I've always been of a mind that people who stand around and talk and don't really do anything are not as entertaining as people who are actively doing stuff. So I'm going to actively do stuff while I talk. So, oh, and by the way, this is an 06 Dyna Lowrider that I bought back in 05, and I've had it ever since. Been riding it ever since. I've been riding motorcycles since I was, I don't know, 16, 17, something like that. Started off with dirt bikes and had a couple of Kawasaki's, and now I got the Harley, which I love. It's been a great bike. Wouldn't trade it for the world. Alright. So I've mentioned before that I'm on several gardening groups on Facebook. I guess I should list them out. Let me think. There's the Jacksonville Gardening Friends, Northeast Florida Gardening Group. There is the Jacksonville Plant Swap, I think, and then the Shitty Harvest, which is a really cool gardening group. But what I want to talk to you about today is when should you plant your spring garden. Now I know that, I'm here in Jacksonville, and being in Jacksonville, the prime time for planting is like right now, or even last week. Really is time to start putting it out if you haven't already, if you're in Jacksonville. But I know most of you are not in Jacksonville. Most of you are all over the country and all over the world. And one of the most common questions has been, well, when do I plant my garden? Where do I find the information that says, no kidding, when I should plant my garden in a particular area? Well, that's a really hard question to answer. Okay, and I'll tell you why. People want to base it off of a couple of different resources, and everybody will get on there and say, well, you need to look up your hardiness zones. You need to look up this, that, and the other thing. So I'm going to go through some of these and talk about what are these things people are talking about. So first off is your hardiness zones. So hardiness zones are just that. That is zones in which certain plants, based upon their needs for heat and their ability to withstand cold temperatures, will be hardy. Now that does have some impact on when you should plant, and it does have some indication for a general time frame that you can plant your garden, but it really does not give you an accurate, no kidding time frame when you should plant your garden. Okay, now how they figure this, all right, hardiness zones are based upon your average annual minimum temperature. All right, so they look at the weather data, and from that data they're able to extrapolate what the average minimum temperature is in the wintertime for the area that you're in. And then from that data, well, actually from the whole country, because this is done by USDA. But what does that really mean for you? Well, it means that when you go about picking plants, you can look at what plants are hardy in what hardiness zones and say, this is a plant I can plant here and it will grow, or this is a plant that I could plant here but it may not grow very well. Alright? But that's really all that means. It's just which zones will certain plants grow well in. Okay? It's just there to determine which plants are going to be hardy in that zone. Alright? And this is really, it is a good resource for your average gardeners like us. But it's really more of a thing for farmers. Alright, so in other words, if I want to grow a cash crop, and I want to be able to make a profit off of it, I definitely don't want to plant something that's not going to be hardy in my zone. I mean, I don't want to grow oranges in North Dakota because they're not going to do well. I mean, you can go buy the trees and plant the trees, but you're probably going to find that you're less than successful. In the same way that I am not going to want to grow classic cherry trees here in the Jacksonville area because they're not going to be successful. Because they need a good solid freeze in order to really put out fruit. Alright, so that's really what hardiness zones are all about. It has nothing to do, really, on when to plant your spring garden. So then you say to yourself, okay, if that's the case, then what is the definitive measure of when I should plant my spring garden? Well, another one is your average last frost date. Now, your average last frost date can be found all over the internet. There's a couple of different websites that offer the information up. Almanac.com, and I found another one, Dave's Gardening or something like that, which is pretty cool. Got a neat little website. But again, that's just an average. Alright? It's a better determination of when to plant, but just like the hardiness zones, it's very large. So the area covered by most average frost date information is zip code. And depending on where your zip code is, that could be a relatively large area. Now here in Jacksonville we have several zip codes, and so it can be a lot more specific for me than it might for somebody in Kansas or Wyoming or places like that. But this does give you an idea of when the average last frost in your area will be. But just like everything else, that's just an educated guess based upon past information, what to expect in the future. Alright, so what you're telling me is I can't go by the average last frost date. Well, no, you really can't. Sadly. I'd love to tell you can. That's just not the case. So, what about lunar planting? For a lot of you, you're going, what? Lunar planting? Yes, I said lunar planting. So there are several other websites out there that will go over the particulars. of how to plant your plants or your crops by moon cycles. Now, I have never done this, right? Moon phases, I should say. I've never done this. I've heard a lot of people swear by it. And I'll tell you, so once upon a time, I was living with this old boy, old Ray Hackenberg, and he wanted a well. And so he went out and found him a water witch. So I was like, what are we talking about here, a water witch? Well, so there's a long tradition of people being able to take some sticks or a willow branch or what have you and find water in the ground, where they use these to determine where you should drill a well. Now, I don't know how accurate this is. I don't have a lot of data on the success or the failure rate of water witches, but I can tell you that old Ray Hackenberg, he hired him as a water witch. That guy come in, witched up where the water was, and we dug a hand-dug well, which was quite the experience. I wish I had YouTube back then. I could have recorded that. It was pretty neat. But we found water like 25 foot deep. So does it work? Well, it did that time. Or at least it seems to. But so I don't know about the whole moon phase thing. It sounds a lot like water witching, which I am not going to say doesn't work, but I also wouldn't tell you it does work. But I also will tell you that if I was going to dig a well on this property, I would probably hire a water witch. So, not sure about the whole moon phase thing. Never done it. Some people swear by it. Even people who you would never think were into witchy kind of things. So, I mean, it's just a way of, a traditional way of determining when to plant. It has nothing to do with witchcraft and all that. I'm not trying to say that at all. But it is not based upon, to my knowledge, hard scientific data. And I'm not a scientist, and I'm not one of those guys, oh, I got to see the science. Though I do try and make my decisions as logically as I can, and I'm not sure this would be for me, but I'm not going to knock down anybody who does do it. So that's another alternative method for how you decide when to plant your plants. But now I'm going to tell you that, you know, everybody's like, well, now you got to use a scientific approach where we know what the last frost date is, and from that we can extrapolate this, and from this we can extrapolate that. And I know I need to plant my tomatoes in my greenhouse on this date based upon this scientific information. Well, all of that comes back down to the idea that you actually know when that last frost date is going to be and what your actual hardiness zones is. And I'm here to tell you that's just not the case. Average frost date is just that. It's just an average, a historical average upon when, you know, which you can base an educated guess. And I gotta tell you, that's exactly what it is, just an educated guess. But you're basing your planting on an educated guess based upon historical information, which we do have a much better handle on historical information now than we used to. We'll give you that. But it is just that, it's just a guess. Alright. So now I will tell you my preference, actually, if I had a preference, and if you were actually to come to me and really sit down with me and say, well, what is the best way to decide when to plant your vegetables? And I would say, talk to those elders that you know, the guys that have been, or the girls that have been doing it for a very long time, have a lot of experience. Ask your elders. And I know in this particular society, much like back when I was growing up, when the mantra was never trust anybody over 30, there was a lot of distrust of elders for whatever reason. You know, and I think some of that comes down to politics. So I'm going to tell you another interesting thing you're probably going to hate me for. But all of you more liberal-leaning people out there, and again, I'm not trying to get into politics, but I guarantee you that a good chunk of you are going to find yourself a whole lot more conservative as you grow older. But anyway, so probably my best advice would be to talk to your elders, talk to people you know that are older, whether it be from church, whether it be from YouTube channels, from guys that have been gardening forever, which there are a few of them out there, whether it be from just friends or work, whatever the case may be. Talk to the old guys. Talk to the people who've been doing it for years and years and years and years in your area. And by in your area, I mean like really close to you. Like if you can, the guy who lives right next door. Because I'm going to tell you, just a small amount of elevation change, just a little bit different microclimate can substantially change the results that you're going to have in your particular garden versus the results that somebody else has in a garden, say, right next door. This is one of the problems that I have with hardiness zones and with average last frost dates and so on. Like I have two houses. I have one here and I got one that my daughter lives in out by the beach. Now here I'm about 11 miles as the crow flies, 11, 12, something like that, miles from the beach. But where she is, she's about 1.5 miles. And here in the Jacksonville area, that is huge. All right, because the beach doesn't get near as many freezes as we do out here, a little further inland. And just that small amount, that 10, 12, 11 mile difference, makes a huge difference. Like this past year, I got down into the 20s and had multiple freezes, whereas out by her house, she had one light freeze. And nearly all of her plants survived, where most of mine died. So there are things that I can grow at that house that I cannot grow here. Just because of that difference in location and basically nearness to a large body of water such as the Atlantic Ocean. And many of you will find the same thing. Like let's say you live on a hill and you talk to the neighbor who lives down at the bottom of the hill. But you know, he might live 500 feet lower than you, or whatever the case may be, 100 feet. But that difference might mean that you get frost where he does not, or vice versa. So hardiness zones are a great way to start, and average last frost is great information to have, but that's not necessarily what you can base your best time to plant off of. So what I would do going forward is try and to keep track. Now everybody keeps track of things in different ways. Some people will write everything down. Others don't write anything down. I'll remember. And you might. I will tell you, if you ever gone to a restaurant and had a waiter or waitress take your order and not write anything down. If you're like me, you probably get a little nervous. Alright, let's see what I actually get. Writing stuff down is a very ancient trick that has helped humanity to achieve what is achieved so far. And without the written word, a lot of what we have achieved would not have been possible. Man, this already looks so much nicer. Alright, so keep track. Keep track of the information as best you can of what has happened in your garden. And however you want to keep track, I'm not here to judge. But keep track of the information as best you can on what has happened in your garden this year, so that next year you have something to base it off of. Now I will tell you that there are years when I swore I would never plant before Easter here in Jacksonville. Alright, because we got such late freezes. Alright, and then there are years where I waited later, and then I was regretting that decision, thinking, man, I really wish I would have planted sooner. So even that, even experience, is not all it's cracked up to be. It is not 100% foolproof way to determine when to plant what. But experience is probably your best guide. Because only you garden in your yard. Only you garden in your microclimate. Only you garden in your garden. Okay. So that is probably going to be one of your best guides. Alright, what has happened in the past. Alright, and then if you add to that the information about the anticipated last frost, your hardiness zones, and experience from your elders. Alright, add all that together and you probably have a pretty good idea when to plant what. Alright, now, you know, we're talking about all this, and then one of the things that always kind of strikes me is, you know, you get everybody, again, on these Facebook groups, they're like, man, I really want to plant now, but I just don't know, and da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, well, if you're worried about it, wait. Most areas, with the exception of a few, there are some areas that don't have a good long growing season. But for most areas, the I don't want to say this, planting early does not mean the difference between success and failure. Planting early just means how soon can I harvest. And most of the hardiness zones throughout the country, you have more than enough time in your growing season to grow a good crop. So why is everybody so worried about planting early? And I mean, if you've got a short growing season where you're at, I mean, I can understand it. You know, if you live in Alaska or Minnesota, or, you know, the farther northern reaches, or even down here, and believe it or not, in the Jacksonville area, this is something that is kind of a concern for us because a lot of crops will die off in the summer. Because we have such a warm, humid summer, and I really do, I think I've said this a million times, but I really do believe that really the problem isn't so much the heat, because we don't really get that hot. I mean, you see some days in the 90s. I don't even think we had any days, or maybe 1 or 2 days last year above 100 where I'm at. So it's really not so much the heat as it is the lack of coolness at night. Most areas, I believe, the temperature drops in the evening time and at night, and then your plants have that opportunity to get a respite or a rest from the you know, the really hot heat of the day. Whereas here in Jax, you know, our nighttime temperatures will stay, you know, just a few degrees cooler than what you see during the day. That's the only thing I can think of, because it just doesn't make sense. I remember, when I was living in Kansas, I was a small kid. I lived in a bunch of foster homes, so I got to experience a lot of different people's gardening methods and such. And I don't remember there being a dead season like there is here. I mean, literally here in Jacksonville, from about June to September, there's a lot of things that just will not grow. And I'm talking things that will grow other places, like, your tomatoes start to die back, your peppers have a hard time. They do a lot better than others. But cucumbers are done, squash for the most part are going to be done. And it's not just the heat, it's also the pest pressure, because we do get a lot of pests because we don't freeze here, real hard. And we will get a freeze once in a while. A couple of them every year. But you don't have that hardcore freeze that you have in a lot of other places. It really, gets down into the dirt. Our dirt is workable all year round. There'll never be a time here in Jacksonville, and in most of the South for that matter, where you just cannot, work your dirt because it's frozen. Frozen pipes are pretty much just limited to that which is above ground. So, here we do have somewhat of a shortened growing season, but we have 2 of them. And don't get me wrong, there's still things you can plant and grow, and I'll be talking more about that here a little later on. The things you can plant and grow in the summertime, even here. So I guess what I'm trying to tell you is, don't freak out, man. You don't have to have it all planted as soon as humanly possible, and take the risk of actually losing your crop because of the fact that you didn't get it planted in time. And in fact, I will tell you that if you're here in Jacksonville, and I've been screaming on my videos for everybody to hear and see for the last couple months, get your stuff planted, get your stuff planted. But I got news for you, man. Like I said, at one point in my gardening career, I had decided, shoot, I am not going to be growing until Easter, because I got burned pretty heavily by a late frost. So, I mean, even here in Jacksonville, there's still time to plant. And for most of you throughout the country, you're just now getting into the time when you can plant. I mean, I got friends on Facebook, friends of the family and so on, that live all over the country. People are still having snow. I mean, this is being recorded, what is it, the 13th of April? So don't freak out. All right, most of you have more than enough growing time to grow what you want to. With certain, exceptions. But your good summertime crops, I'm talking, your tomatoes and your peppers and so on, you still have more than enough time to get them into the ground and still be successful. I mean, shoot, if I can still do it here in Jacksonville, you can do it pretty much all over the rest of the country. All right, but with that being said, have a backup plan. Trust your gut. I mean, if you're not sure, then maybe plant half of your plants. Maybe throw a few plants out, see how they do, and then throw the rest out. Save some plants back. I've got plants in the garden right now. Or I'm sorry, over by the garden in pots still, so that if for some reason I get a late, frost after Easter, I've still got some backup tomatoes. But have a backup plan. Have an idea. Well, okay, worst comes to worst. Even if you don't have enough plants, save a little bit of money so that you can go out and you can buy you some plants at one of the big box stores, or your favorite nursery, what have you, or ask friends and neighbors and so on whether or not you can get something from them. All right, and if you're going to plant early, I would recommend just planting partially. And that also does a couple things for you. One, if you do have a late freeze, then you're not done. Your garden experience isn't toast. And when you keep these plants back, more than likely they're not going to grow as fast as the ones you put in the ground. And even if it doesn't freeze after that point, you can put them out, let's say a month later, and now what you'll have is a big tomato and a small tomato. So once this one burns out and uses up all of its growing capacity, then you've got your smaller one to start looking towards. It's called succession planting. Okay, so that's one option, keep a backup plan. Some of the resources I would recommend that you look into, all right? One of the best ones is probably your state university. The state universities usually have an extension office, all right? And if you look it up online for your particular state, like here we have University of Florida extension office, and they'll have a planting calendar there. Now, just like the hardiness zones and your average last frost dates, it's based upon a wide area. Like here in Florida, it splits Florida into 3 different zones, the north, the central, and southern zones. And then it tells you what to plant in those zones in what month. All right, so again, it's pretty fuzzy, all right, but it gives you some kind of idea of what to do. Another thing to check is almanac.com. Almanac.com, it is a site where you can get certain information for free, but others where you, other areas that you have to pay for. All right, and I believe they still give a 30-day trial for free. I'm not 100% on that because I'm paying for it. I think it's worth it, so I go ahead and pay for it. It is the oldest, to my knowledge, the oldest gardening publication in the United States at least. All right, and then Google. I mean, Google, you know, I cannot tell you how much I enjoy Google. You know, having come from an era where there was no Google, where Google was just not a thing, you just really don't understand how good you got at having Google. When I grew up, you either had to look it up in a book or talk to somebody who knew or guess. I mean, pretty much that was all your resources available. We started getting the internet a little bit, but none of that was even really connected to any information of use until, you know, late 90s, early 2000s. So Google's a fantastic resource. But along that line, I got to tell you that, you know, no matter what you do, you're going to have some success and you're going to have some failures. Like I've had years I just can't grow tomatoes to save my skin, and other years where, you know, it's been like last year, it was cucumbers. Man, I couldn't get a cucumber to save my life. I think I got 6 total cucumbers, four total cucumbers, something like that, some incredibly low amount. After planting multiple seeds, and even after having, I think I was up to 8 or 10 plants that I put out, and still only got like 6 total cucumbers. It was miserable. Not really sure to this day what exactly happened, but some years are like that. Some years things just don't want to grow. I think it was lack of water last year, and we've gotten better rain this year. Because I'm going to tell you, you know, you can water all you want. Well, if you water enough, it'll soak in. But nothing is really going to wet your down deep soil except for rain, because rain covers everything throughout the entire garden and yard. But yeah, Google's a fantastic resource. And then, like I said, talk to people in groups. You know, there's a million Facebook groups out there and various other social media platforms that people are putting out information continuously about gardening, particularly now because a lot of people are concerned with all the talk about food shortages. So a lot more people are putting out information about gardening. So there's a ton of information out there. I would just caution you to try and get local information wherever possible. I'll be honest with you, one of the biggest reasons I started this YouTube channel was because there just were not a lot of Jacksonville-based gardening channels on YouTube. I just couldn't find it. I found a ton of them down around Tampa area, Orlando area, even down Daytona area. But up here, for some reason, it's like people didn't believe you could actually grow a garden here. So, which you can, by all means. I mean, you can grow a fantastic garden here. So look local. Try and find local groups. Try and find local gardeners that can help you out with that information. But I'm going to leave you with this last thought. All right, when to plant your garden is completely a guess. All right, and I'm going to tell you right now. Bottom line, it's a guess. Now you can make it an educated guess the best you can by getting information. You know, some of the places I listed. You know. Look at your hardiness zone, look at your average last frost date, talk to people who've been gardening, even use your moon phase planting calendars. and keep track of what you've done. But next year is not going to be like this year. I mean, it might be really similar, but it's going to be different, I guarantee you. So it's all just a guess. If you don't have to put them out earlier, then maybe consider waiting. Give it 2 extra weeks beyond that last frost date and see how you feel. What does your gut tell you? Is it going to stay cold, or is it going to start warming up and stay warm? All right. But bottom line, it's an educated guess. All right. So don't freak out about it. Plant when you feel like you ought to. Keep a backup plan and hope for the best. I mean, there's a million different ways to cover up your vegetables if you do get a late frost. And basically, you kind of just got to deal with what Mother Nature throws at you. I mean, I've had years where, you know, I thought I was going to get a bumper crop of peaches and various other things, and I got nothing because of a late frost. And that happens. I mean, even down here in Florida, there's been years where the orange crop just went kaput because of late frost. All right, so that's what I got to say today. Don't freak out. Throw your stuff in the ground and hope for the best. All right, and as to when you should plant your spring garden, I mean, that's up to you. That's up to your particular locality. It's up to the information you've got and what feels good to you. All right, I've got mine planted, but that doesn't mean you should. All right, thanks for stopping by. Do me a favor, give me a like and a subscribe. Let me know what you think. And give me some comments. Let me know what you think about what I've said. And what do you do? How do you figure out when to plant your vegetables? All right? So like I said, thanks for stopping by. Y'all take care. Come back and see me. But most importantly, grow something.